The Boy Who Never Came Home, the Dylan Redwine case. On November 18th, 2012, a 13-year-old boy boarded a plane to visit his father for Thanksgiving. Less than 24 hours later, he vanished. There was no phone call, no goodbye message, no sign that he had run away. The last person known to have seen him alive was his own father. Nearly a decade later, that same father would be convicted of killing him. But what happened between those two moments became one of the most disturbing child homicide cases in Colorado history. This is the story of Dylan Redwine, a boy who never came home, and a father who spent years insisting he knew nothing about his son's disappearance. Dylan Redwine was described by family and friends as funny, energetic, and easy to like. He loved baseball, enjoyed spending time outdoors, and had a close relationship with his older brother, Corey. His parents, Mark and Elaine Redwine, had divorced years earlier after a bitter and prolonged custody battle. Following the divorce, Elaine moved with the children to Colorado Springs, while Mark remained in Bayfield, a small community near Durango. The relationship between the former spouses had become deeply hostile. Years of legal disputes and disagreements over custody had placed Dylan in the middle of an increasingly toxic family conflict. By late 2012, Dylan was living primarily with his mother, under a court-ordered visitation agreement. However, he was required to spend Thanksgiving with his father. According to family members, Dylan did not want to make the trip. His grandmother was seriously ill with cancer, and he wanted to stay home with friends and family. But the court order left him with no choice. On November 18th, Dylan boarded a flight from Colorado Springs to Durango. Before he left, his mother hugged him goodbye. Neither of them knew it would be the last time they would ever see each other. After arriving in Durango, Dylan texted his mother. The message ended with a frowning emoji. It was a small detail, but it revealed a lot about how he felt. "I did not want to be there." That evening, surveillance cameras captured Dylan and Mark shopping at Walmart. Later, they stopped at McDonald's. These sightings would become critically important, because they were the last confirmed images of Dylan alive. Dylan sent a text message to a friend. It would be the final communication anyone ever received from him. Minutes later, his phone stopped transmitting. It would never be used again. According to Mark, father and son returned home and went to bed. The next morning, Mark claimed he left for work around 7:30 a.m. Dylan was still at the house. When Mark returned several hours later, he said Dylan was gone. The television was on. A bowl of cereal sat on the table. Dylan had disappeared. At least that was Mark's version of events. Almost immediately, investigators began to notice serious problems with the story. Dylan had not taken money. He had not contacted friends. He had not called his mother. He had not used social media. Nothing suggested he had voluntarily run away. Search dogs were brought to the property. They followed Dylan's scent away from the house for only a short distance before suddenly losing it. To investigators, that suggested Dylan may have entered a vehicle rather than continuing on foot. Search teams launched a massive effort. Volunteers combed the rugged terrain around Bayfield. Helicopters searched from the air. Dive teams examined nearby lakes and reservoir. The FBI joined the investigation. Still, there was no trace of Dylan. As the search continued, Mark appeared repeatedly in media interviews. He said he loved his son. He said he wanted him home. He said Dylan meant everything to him. But investigators and family members began noticing behavior they considered unusual. Some felt he spoke about Dylan in the past tense. Others questioned why he appeared detached from the ongoing searches. The concerns grew when investigators executed search warrants on Mark's home. Inside, they discovered evidence that dramatically changed the direction of the case. Dylan's blood was found in several locations inside the house, including areas of the living room. Investigators also used specially trained cadaver dogs. One alerted inside the home, another alerted near the rear of Mark's pickup truck. The findings did not prove murder, but they raised a critical question. If Dylan had simply walked away, why was his blood found inside the residence? And why were there indications that human remains may have been present in the truck? A's investigators dug deeper. They uncovered a possible source of conflict between father and son. Approximately a year before Dylan disappeared, he and his older brother had discovered disturbing photographs on Mark's computer. According to testimony later presented in court, the images deeply upset Dylan. Family members said he became disgusted and embarrassed by what he had seen. Friends later reported that Dylan intended to confront his father about the photographs, during the Thanksgiving visit. Investigators began considering a troubling possibility. What if that confrontation had actually happened? Prosecutors would eventually argue that it did. They believed that sometime during the evening of November 18th, an argument erupted inside Mark's home. The relationship between father and son had already deteriorated significantly. The photographs added another layer of tension. According to the prosecution's theory, emotions exploded. The confrontation escalated, and Dylan was attacked. No witness saw what happened. No confession was ever obtained. But prosecutors believed the evidence pointed to a violent encounter inside the living room. They argued that Dylan died there. Then came the cover-up. According to the state's case, Mark cleaned the scene, concealed Dylan's body, and transported the remains away from the property. Investigators believed the pickup truck played a key role. The cadaver dog alerts and other evidence suggested the body may have been moved using the vehicle. The destination, prosecutors argued, was a remote wilderness area near Middle Mountain Road. The location was rugged, isolated, and difficult to access. Heavy snow covered the area for much of the year. If someone wanted to hide evidence, it was an ideal place. For months, search teams found nothing. Then the snow began to melt. Investigators expanded their search into areas previously inaccessible. A significant lead emerged when evidence suggested Mark had been seen driving alone near Middle Mountain Road months after Dylan disappeared. The area drew immediate attention. Why was he there? What reason could he possibly have for traveling into such a remote location? Soon, searchers discovered a critical piece of evidence. A Nike Air Jordan shoe. It matched the type Dylan had been wearing when he vanished. Then came an even more devastating discovery. Human bones. DNA testing confirmed the remains belonged to Dylan Redwine. The search for a missing child had become a homicide investigation. Years later, hikers discovered additional remains, including Dylan's skull. The condition of the skull proved especially important. Forensic experts identified injuries consistent with blunt force trauma. The findings strongly supported the conclusion that Dylan's death was not accidental. Investigators now had evidence pointing toward homicide. The question was no longer whether Dylan had been killed. The question was who killed him. By 2017, prosecutors believed they had enough evidence to move forward. Mark Redwine was arrested and charged with second-degree murder and child abuse resulting in death. Even after his arrest, he maintained his innocence. I denied harming Dylan. I denied knowing how his son died. I denied any involvement in the disposal of the remains. The case eventually went to trial. The prosecution faced a challenge. There were no eyewitnesses. No confession, no murder weapon, no surveillance footage showing the crime. Instead, the case relied on a large collection of circumstantial evidence. Prosecutors argued that all of the evidence pointed in one direction. Mark was the last person known to be with Dylan. Dylan's blood was found inside Mark's home. Cadaver dogs alerted inside the residence and near Mark's truck. Evidence suggested a deteriorating relationship between father and son. The remote location where Dylan's remains were found had connections to Mark, and investigators believed he repeatedly provided misleading information throughout the investigation. The defense argued that the state's case was built on assumptions. They challenged the interpretation of the forensic evidence. They questioned whether investigators had proven exactly how Dylan died, and they insisted there was no direct evidence showing Mark committed murder. Ultimately, the jury disagreed. In October 2021, Mark Redwine was convicted of second-degree murder and child abuse, resulting in death. The judge delivered a powerful statement during sentencing. He said that a parent's responsibility is to protect their child from harm. Instead, he concluded, Mark had caused the injuries that ended Dylan's life. The court sentenced him to 48 years in prison. For a man in his 60s, it was effectively a life sentence. Even today, however, one question remains unanswered. What exactly happened inside that house on the night of November 18th, 2012? Only two people truly knew the answer. One of them was Dylan. The other was Mark. Dylan never had the chance to tell his story, and Mark has never admitted what happened. What remains is a trail of evidence, years of investigation, and a family forever changed by the loss of a 13-year-old boy. Dylan boarded a plane because adults and court orders told him he had to. I expected to spend Thanksgiving with his father. Instead, he disappeared into one of Colorado's most haunting criminal cases. For his mother, his brother, and everyone who followed the investigation, the tragedy was never just about solving a crime. It was about a boy whose life ended far too soon. A boy who should have come home, but never did.